ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the FanTC football podcast with Nick and Kody. We are coming at you with part two of our AFC North breakdown. That is the Steelers and Browns. We're going to roll right into it here with our notes about the Steelers. Obviously, losing Big Ben this offseason, replacing with Mitchell Trubisky at first, and then drafting Kenny Pickens in the first round of the NFL draft. I don't know how much they did other than that as far as significant upgrades go anywhere along the line here. I mean, they have a great defense, and I think they'll have kind of a crappy offense, and I'm not sure that has really changed since the end of last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So just want to plug in, like, comment, subscribe. Check us out on all social media. All of it's linked below in the video or the podcast description if you are listening to our second video on Apple Podcasts. So be sure to check those out. But going right into the Steelers, I am not a huge fan of what they did this offseason. Mostly what they did at the quarterback position, drafting Trubisky, then grabbing Pickett right afterwards. It's just you're kind of, I don't know, like Mason, like you couldn't have had Mason Rudolph mentor Pickett or whatever. Like I just feel like that's such a weird move, getting two similar style quarterbacks. And I don't think that the ceiling for Pickett is extremely high. Obviously, you never quite know until everything gets worked out on the NFL field. But it just seemed like it almost seemed like a narrative pick when at the time that they took it, like. The pick guy fell to us. Like, it's our job to take this guy and keep him in Pittsburgh, rah, Pittsburgh all the way through. And I just didn't really like it. I was not a fan at all. I do like grabbing George Pickens, wide receiver there. He's a interesting player, to say the least. If you look at some of his highlight tape, he does like to get into it with the other team, so he should be very interesting to watch this year, especially on the Steelers, who put up with AB's bullcrap for forever. So I can only imagine what Pickens is going to get away with, especially if he's good. So, but yeah, I think honestly just less quarterback experience. If Trubisky's their starter, I could see them getting a playoff berth. They'd have to be the very last team like they did last year. If Kenny Pickett's their starter, I'm going to have them as probably going 8-9 and missing out on the playoffs. Their just defense is too good. Their coaching staff knows how to win games, so I don't think they're going to be mediocre, which is probably why they took Pickett when they had the chance to get a new franchise quarterback. I just don't see that playing out for them in the long run.
Yeah, I think they're a high floor team, like we said, with their good defense and great coaching staff. I think if the offense bottoms out, then you'll see a team that's going to lose more games than they win, but still, end up 6-11, 7-10, not necessarily 4-13, 5-12. This roster is a little bit too good for that. So we can roll into the fantasy aspects here. I'm going to kick it to you first because you have a very hot take on Najee Harris that I want you to get out to the people, especially because he's on our dynasty league, and he is on your roster as well, Kody.
He is,
so I'd like to hear
absolutely.
you feel bad about your own man.
So for clearance, our mini dynasty league, we get to keep 4 players every year. Draft position doesn't matter. It's just we move into the next year, we get to keep whatever 4 we want. So obviously, I'm keeping Najee. He's going to be a key member to plenty of championship teams over the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm not moving off of him in any kind of dynasty or mini dynasty league. But for this year in redraft, he is going way too high in fantasy football drafts. He is going as the running back 4, 6th overall, which means you're taking, Kupp, Jefferson, or Chase if you're crazy enough to take him that early. He's coming off of a season with an old Big Ben that just hyper-targeted him. Anytime that the pocket broke down was just a drop down to either him or another guy we'll get into in Deontay Johnson. And he played all 17 games last year, which sounds like a great thing whenever you're talking about a fantasy player. But when you break out his stats last year, he was the 8th running back in points per games played. So he is not quite as efficient as maybe his season-long totals make you think that he can be, which is very key. If he ends up going down for 2 or 3 of those games, his numbers are maybe closer to that running back 8 or 9, which is where I think he should be going in fantasy football drafts. and I'll go ahead and say my hot take right now. I'd say two of these names aren't that hot. The other one is, but I'm taking Leonard Fournette, Joe Mixon, and Aaron Jones, all three of them in a single year redraft league over Najee Harris. Nick, tear it apart. Let's see what you have to say.
Honestly, I don't really hate your take. So I'm kind of on board with the Najee Harris, let's call it slander at this point. I think it's going way too high as well. I might not be quite as bold as you. I'd probably take him before Fournette, but that's just because I trust the player a little bit more.
That's
Younger
fair.
guy, probably a little bit more volume guaranteed. But at the same time, the one thing I really love that you brought up is the fact that he was running back 8 points per game. I feel like that's a really important aspect that we sort of overlook after the year is over. We just look at season long numbers. You say, oh, Najee Harris is the RB4. He's being drafted as the RB4. Kind of makes sense, right? Especially because he's young and he should not be moving downward in opportunity or skill. But at the same time, running backs get hurt. All of them do. It is not something that you can really predict year to year as far as running back to running back goes. So you really want to be looking for the guys that are producing game to game, even if they only played 14 games versus Najee 17. So the fact that Najee was RB8 in points per game probably means, like you said, he's going to be closer to that RB10, and he's being drafted a little bit too high right now. So I would definitely agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm feeling very strongly about this. This could really come back to bite me, but I would have Najee Harris falling out of top 10 in running backs this year. There was a little blurb out of Pittsburgh that did say they wanted to manage his workload because they don't want him for his long term career, yada yada yada. But he may be the best option on this offense for them to win games, which is where his upside is still there. If Mitchell Trubisky's their quarterback, he's not dumping it down to him 5 times a game when the pocket breaks down. He's just going to try and find a running lane and bust through that and pick up as many yards as he can. So
That's
again,
what you kind of see from athletic quarterbacks in that situation.
right.
So that kind of ends up happening with the targets. It sort of breaks down when the quarterback can move a little bit because they're not going to dump it down. They're just going to run it themselves. If you want to have anything else to say about Najee, I will let you have the floor. Otherwise, I'll take the lead on Deontay because I have kind of a strong take on him as well.
All right, let's move into Deontay. Let's see what you got to say.
Sure. Okay. So Deontay, he is being drafted 36th overall, wide receiver 15 right now. I think he ends up being a similar story to what you talked about with Najee before, and that Big Ben and him had somewhat of a connection as far as at least the target volume goes. I mean, Deontay was being targeted almost 10 times per game while he was out there. I think the targets ended up being nine per game with Big Ben out there last year, which is an incredible number. And if he ends up repeating that volume, then I will be very wrong about this. But I think that Deontay's particular type of game lends itself to Ben Roethlisberger's particular weaknesses later in his career, which is throwing the ball down the field. So I think you're going to have to hope that Deontay holds this target volume, or his production is going to fall off significantly. And even last year, he finished wide receiver 12. Drafting at wide receiver 15 this year just seems way too close to his ceiling.
That is his ceiling. I agree with you there. I mean, if you're drafting him there, you are just saying that he's not going to have any fall off with a quarterback change, which I think is so ridiculous to assume. One thing, we were talking about this previously. You did mention Deontay Johnson he does have a really good ability to get open. He can create separation, which is really good for young quarterbacks or less accurate quarterbacks in Trubisky's case. But if he were to end up as the wide receiver 15, that's everything going right for him in Pittsburgh. I would even say he's a back end wide receiver 2 at the best for me drafting wise. I mean, he would have to fall into that 20 to 24 category for wide receivers. And then I'm still going to be questioning him with some of the names that are there and the potential upside you can get out of those players. So last year I kicked myself for not having him on any of my teams, and he was really good. But when you really look into his numbers, how much of that was the Big Ben effect, and how much of that's going to be, how much can he duplicate this year? Do you have anything else? I was going to use that to lead into Chase Claypool, which I like more for a fantasy aspect, but go right ahead.
Yeah, all I want to say real quick is that I think what we have here in Deontay Johnson is kind of a PPR reliant, inefficient receiver that is sort of going to have to maintain that status quo to maintain relevance in the fantasy world, and that's just relying on whatever QB plays to target him as much as Ben did, which is not a bet that I want to make necessarily. But yeah, Claypool, I'll let you take the floor here. I think we both kind of like him, but go ahead, Cody.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Claypool, you're getting him at the 107th overall pick, wide receiver 46. He's going to be better than the wide receiver 46 over the course of a year. He just has too high of a touchdown potential. His athletic profile, has him as a guy that can just break tackles, just a little smaller version than DK Metcalf. Maybe not quite as fast, but that's the kind of frame and athleticism you're working with here. With Big Ben, it seemed like anytime Claypool got the ball with Big Ben, it was kind of just a heave or a Big Ben design play to where he would try to push the ball down the field. Whereas this year, I feel like Claypool is going to get a lot more work with whatever quarterback they have, just because I don't think that they're going to look for Deontay, look for Najee, and those be their only two targets. I feel like with a younger quarterback in there, even like a Mitch, if he's moving that pocket, if he's rolling out of it, kind of looking for some deep shots, as we saw in Chicago a little bit, Claypool's going to be the guy on the other end of those, I believe. I don't mind adding him as a wide receiver 4 or 5 on your team. I'd be careful with his value getting up a little too high. I definitely wouldn't take him too much higher than this because he's very boom or bust, but if he's there at the 107th overall pick, that's great value.
Agreed. Yeah, not much else to say on Claypool. I think he's got a lot of potential, a lot of downside, but where you're getting him right now is just fine with me. Pat Fryermuth, we can touch on real quick here. I really like this player, actually, probably more than I should, honestly, just because of his name and his nickname from the footballers. But
The move.
I think he's a solid player and really has an opportunity here with some unproven wide receiver talent, we could say. Claypool kind of streaky this year and last. I think he could potentially move up into that number 2 target in this offense. If he falls, go ahead and grab him, but don't reach for him in anything more than the 11th round.
Yep, I agree with you there. Yeah, I mean, Fryermuth, the legend is almost as big as the player already at this point if you're a fantasy footballers fan. Um, but I do think that he'll be a fine tight end. He may fall into the streamer category, so if you like him, I wouldn't reach on him in a draft because there's probably going to be like his bye week. He's probably not getting kept on the roster unless
No.
he has like a real big breakout. So I think he's going to end up in the
Yeah.
waiver wire at some point. Don't reach on him in drafts. If you like the player and the talent, you'll probably be able to pick him up at some point throughout the season.
100%. I agree. Let's transition to the Browns real quick here. So, tough team for us to talk about. We were putting this off until we reached a conclusion with the Deshaun Watson situation. Unfortunately, that has not come to fruition at this point. We're still waiting. It's gone back and forth all offseason between it being a full year and 6 games and a full year and 6 games. Who knows what's going to happen here? We're going to do our best to touch on the value of these players as they are right now. But honestly, I mean, the Browns have a solid roster, and I think that they could be a good team, but I don't really have much more to add until we know about Watson's situation because it's really tough to comment on anything right now without knowing the status of the team.
Yeah, one thing, and this is just a personal thing for me, and obviously we are creating a podcast around the NFL. There's going to be plenty of sensitive subjects similar to this that we'll have to talk about if this is a 30-year plan like we plan on it being. So, what I will say
Cool.
about this is I can't imagine Deshaun Watson getting under a year suspension when Calvin Ridley bet no more than $1,500 and got a full year, which I understand all you gamblers and you can't be betting from the inside. I know I'm a gambler as well. Shut the fuck up. I get it. I understand where you're coming from, but everything that Deshaun Watson has done and drugged the NFL through over the past 2 years, this was before, but even the whole thing with the Texans, he wanted out. All this got out right afterwards. It's such a muddy situation. I personally believe it has to be a year. Just set the precedent, and move on from it. But obviously, there's other things going on. That's just my personal take. I think there's been enough information coming out now that anything less than a year, I feel like it's gonna come across on social media as a failure by the NFL, which isn't fair because social media is not real life. But I think the NFL has the pressure on it to where if this is anything less than a year, it's gonna be kind of concerning for them. And I just as the NFL, I don't know if I would want Deshaun Watson on my football field next year. Like I would rather him just be gone for another year, let things simmer down, and then him just kind of sneak on to the Browns next year, and they do whatever they do. But if he touches a football field this year, I feel like it's going to be very uncomfortable for a lot of the women who enjoy watching the NFL, which the NFL doesn't want to put them in that situation. So, sorry, the long rant there on
Definitely.
Deshaun Watson, but that's just my thoughts about it. We haven't really made a video about our thoughts on the situation because it is so, you know, iffy. He said, she said, all that, but just you guys gave a year to a guy who put $1,500 on a parlay. Like if you would have bet, a $1,500 on a Falcons receiver under receiving totals because he knew that player was going to be out that week, yeah, like that's insider betting, obviously. But he was betting on the Falcons and a couple other teams, and I guarantee he lost because so does every other rookie bettor. So I just that's my takeaway. Long rant. Sorry for the listeners, but that's all I have to say about Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, I mostly agree with what you said there. It's a tough look for Calvin Ridley to get a year for betting on games, and then Deshaun Watson to get less than a year for what he did. So I don't have anything else to add.
Yep.
I pretty much agree
Cool.
with your point there. We can move into the fantasy aspects of the Browns, at least the ones that we can currently adequately assess. I think those start and end with the running backs myself.
For sure.
Nick Chubb currently going at 24th overall, RB14. I think he kind of is what he is at this point. He is a great runner of the football, very efficient, and he's behind a great O line, and he's on a team that really wants to run the ball, which all sounds great. But then, obviously there is the catch. He does not really get involved in the passing game, and he is sort of limited by Kareem Hunt's involvement, especially in the red zone and again on third down. So
Even Dearness
what you're going to see
Johnson
from
eats into his carries.
and
So
yeah,
it's
they
not
have
even
another
a
great running back.
situation that Kareem Hunt gets hurt and he's a full fledged beast. He is a first and second down running back, and that's how you should view him
Seems like
fantasy wise.
the Browns really look to kind of limit his exposure to being a full time back, which probably is good for his long term health, but is a little bit frustrating from a fantasy perspective. I think what you're going to see from Nick Chubb is what you've seen from him before. He'll have games where he'll go for 140 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, which is great. He'll also have games where he'll have 17 carries for 60 yards and doesn't catch a ball, and that'll kind of kill you that week. So he's a little bit boomer bust from the running back position, especially in PPR leagues. I love the player, and he's probably going to finish around the RB14. But unless we see an injury to Hunt and Johnson, I don't know how much higher he can go from this RB14 ranking.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from there. So in our mock draft we recently did, I got him at the end of the third, which I thought was an insane value at that point, which is probably 8 or 9 more picks than where we have him mocked at using NFC ADP. So with Nick Chubb, if he's your RB2 in that third round, I don't mind taking that pick because you probably already have a very solid RB1 and he's not bad. Now, this is the issue I have with Nick Chubb is I could take, let's say in the first round, let's just use his ADP that we're using from NFC ADP, 24th overall pick, which would be the last pick in the second round. So you add Jonathan Taylor in that first round with your 101, and then you could come around, you can grab Nick Chubb, which looks amazing. Obviously, any guy you're going up against in a fan, you're going to have the running back core on lock. But the more I've thought about this is if you get Jonathan Taylor as your running back one, I would feel a lot more comfortable having someone who's potentially more inconsistent, like a Kareem Hunt, as my running back two, and then just loading up on either the tight end or wide receiver position and missing out on Nick Chubb. And kind of, banking on locking in that running back two with a little bit of a lower ceiling a little bit later in the draft as opposed to taking Nick Chubb. It hurts to say I had him last year. He's really, really good, but I mean, he could have Derrick Henry esque stats and games if he was three downs as their running back. But Hunt gets in there, Johnson gets in there. There's too much limiting his upside. I think even at the end of the second round, I'm gonna take someone like a Mike Evans with Chris Godwin's news and pair him with another great wide receiver, and then go a little lower with the running back later on. I feel like you feel the same way. I know I kind of led into Kareem Hunt. You're really high on Kareem Hunt, so we can kind of transition. Let's kind of hear why you think that Kareem Hunt can
Yeah, I mean,
easily
I think
emerge.
it's mostly about his draft price right now. NFC ADP has him at 91st overall, RB 33, which I think probably won't hold. I think you're probably going to see him in the low 20s when draft season comes around. But even there, I really like him. I think I took him in the seventh round of our mock
Yep.
draft that we had, full PBR, 12 team mock draft. But I think he's just a really solid contributor. He's been at least a flex worthy play as long as he's been in Cleveland, even with Chubb healthy. And then he always has the upside of Chubb getting hurt and him working out as a 15 carry, 5 to 6 target guy behind that great O line. So
Yep.
I think Kareem Hunt, even if Chubb stays healthy the whole year, is a decent value where he's going, and you always have that small wild card of him becoming that top 10 back if Chubb is ever to get banged up.
Yep. And there's also another wild card in there. If the Browns are having a bad season, Kareem Hunt could potentially get traded to a team that maybe needs some running back play. He may actually end up being an RB1 on a team at some point in the year. I don't see that happening because I
True.
think they're going to have to rely on their run game to be a viable team. But still something to consider when you are drafting him. Maybe worth moving him up a couple slots. Not too much, but just a little bit. And kind of interesting here because we don't have too much more on the Browns, but I just thought about this. I would rather have Kareem Hunt on my team and Nick Chubb get injured as opposed to having Nick Chubb on my team and Kareem Hunt getting injured, which is just another kind of reason why we're, you know, telling you guys to go get Kareem Hunt at the value that he's at and, maybe pass on Nick Chubb until he gets to that end of the third round and, you know, maybe stack up and, grab that tight end or grab that stud wide receiver that's available instead of Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I think that's kind of hammering home the point that we drove home earlier, which is that Nick Chubb's role doesn't really change too much when Kareem Hunt
Yep,
leaves, and Kareem Hunt's role changes a ton when Nick Chubb leaves.
for
So that's
sure.
kind of the idea there. And Hunt again is about 4 rounds cheaper in drafts, at least, maybe even more right now. So that's the reason that we prefer Hunt at his value. Amari Cooper, we can touch on real quick, but he's a guy that's sort of hard to value right now. Again, I think if I'm giving my overarching view, if it's Brissett for 16 games and you're drafting him at wide receiver 29, I'm saying no, thank you. If it's Brissett for 6 to 8 games and then Watson after that, wide receiver 29 is probably okay because, again, I think he could be a wide receiver 1 when Watson's there. But it's sort of a messy situation to talk about, as you expressed before.
Yep.
And right now, I'm probably just staying off Cooper until I know for sure.
I agree with you. I will throw another candidate in there in David Njoku. Definitely not new one worth drafting, but if Deshaun is going to come back after 6 games and you have a bad tight end, may not be a bad idea just to go out there and grab him and see what he can do with Deshaun Watson. Um,
They
but
paid him.
yeah, exactly. I mean, he's going to be there, and there's been plenty of times. Maybe he just didn't like Baker or something, because there was like the last 3 years, it's always like we're trading Njoku or Njoku wants out, and it's like this year, new quarterback, 5-year extension, he's ready to to be a Brown. Just makes no
You wouldn't
sense.
be the first one that doesn't like Baker, so I
Yeah,
mean, it's very possible.
absolutely.
All right, guys, that's going to be it for our part two of the AFC North podcast. We are going to have one more part here with the Ravens and our best bets.